Hello everyone and welcome to the short video tutorial series of Planet Pro. I'm Mike Shaw. In this video, let's talk about the Coordinates and Elevation tool. There are 6 photography tools in Planet Pro. If you tap the menu, here are the photography tools. Tap on it, you'll see the 6 tools. Let's try to memorize these 6 tools. Each tool will determine what to display over here in this tool's information area, as well as what overlay to display on the map. You'll find that you'll need to switch tools constantly when you're planning. Now, the photography tools have nothing to do with the date and the time or the ephemeris information. So I can swipe down from the ephemeris page and tap the Hide All button to hide the ephemeris page in the date-time panel. Now we have a much bigger map area to work with. I do this when I don't need to see the ephemeris information, like when I'm only using the photography tools or adding markers. We found it's a bit cumbersome to access commonly used functions from the menu, so we added 2 other ways to access the 6 tools quickly. So pay close attention to these little arrow buttons. One's here, and another one's over here. The arrow buttons in Planet indicate that you can swipe to reveal more information. So let's swipe down from this area. Here are the same 6 tools. Finally, if you tap the Viewfinder button, you can find 6 buttons over here. We can't write the names as there isn't enough space, but they correspond to the 6 tools. Coordinates and Elevation is the first tool. So what are coordinates and why do we need them? Well, as a photo planning app, we need to know the camera's exact location or the subject location. Now, the normal way to describe a location, such as a house number or a street name, won't work in our case because it doesn't define a precise location. Not to mention, we often go to rural locations that have no street names or even streets. So we leverage a commonly used coordinate systems based on GPS. Taking this globe, for example, the origin is here. The x-axis is to the east, we call that longitude, and it ranges from negative 180 degrees to positive 180 degrees. The y-axis is to the north, we call this latitude, and it ranges from negative 90 degrees to positive 90 degrees. Each axis is a number. By using 2 numbers, we can define any location on the surface of the Earth. For each number, we define it up to the 6th decimal point, which corresponds to about 10 centimeters or about 4 inches in accuracy. This precision is plenty good enough for our planning purposes, and these numbers can be seen right here. Now you may wonder, what location are these coordinates for? See if you can take a guess. And if you guessed it to be the map center where there's a circle, you're right. To confirm your guess, let's drag the map like this. As you can see, the coordinates are changing and updating, so the map center is in fact the correct answer. But that's not all. You can also press and hold over here to select a location like this. We call this marker the selection marker. It indicates the location that's selected. Now the coordinates here are for this location. Now if you drag the map, the coordinates don't update because the selected location isn't changing. There are also other cases. Let's set the camera pin and the scene pin. If you drag the map, the coordinates are still updating, which means it's still for the map center. But if you tap to select the camera pin like this, and then drag the map, the coordinates are not updating, which means the coordinates are for the camera pin location. How do you make sure? Let's take a look at the title bar. It says here, camera selected, and also it shows the coordinates on the subtitle. The 2 sets of coordinates are the same because sometimes the area isn't visible when another photography tool is selected, so the subtitle will always be visible to show you the coordinates of the selected location. If you select the scene pin, you'll see the scene coordinates on the title bar. You can tap here to see the different formats of the coordinates. Everything you see here refers to the same coordinate location, just in different formats. Like this one has N or W instead of using a negative number. Or this one uses degrees, minutes, and seconds instead of just a decimal number. And you can also see a few other formats. Those are mostly for professionals, and if you're not familiar with them, you can just ignore them. You may find coordinates in different formats on the web. For example, here are the coordinates for the Statue of Liberty. These are in the degree, minute, second format. I can copy them and then paste it to the search box of Planet, and Planet can take it and center the map at that location. In the Google Map app, you can press and hold a location, swipe up the bottom sheet, and find the coordinates of the location over here. In this case, we have the decimal number format, which is the same format as Planet. Press and hold to copy, then paste it to Planet, and again, the map is centered at that location. Now let's talk about the elevation. You can tap to retrieve the elevation of a location, And many people think that the elevation is part of the map database, but that's actually not the case. The elevation data needs to be retrieved from a different source called the elevation provider. You can go to Menu, Settings, Service Providers. Then this online elevation provider is where we get the elevation data. We support 3 providers, as you can see here: Google, Bing, and Planet. So what is the elevation? Well, the elevation is just the vertical difference between a certain point on the actual ground or terrain and the mean sea level. This diagram also shows what altitude or height is if you want to learn more. We support 3 elevation providers. The first one is the Planet elevation provider. It has a 90-meter horizontal resolution. Then we have the Bing elevation providers. You'll need to apply for a key in order to use that. Finally, we have the Google elevation provider. You'll also need a key, and it has a monthly quota of $200. As long as you don't use it over this budget, you don't need to pay anything. Now, we're all heavy Planet users, and we only use around $50 to $100 per month, which is still well below the $200 limit. So why do we use different providers for the elevation? Because of the accuracy level. And generally speaking, the Google elevation is far more accurate than Bing, which in turn is more accurate than Planet. However, just so you know, even for the most accurate Google elevation data, it's still not 100% accurate. As a matter of fact, the elevation error is the main error source if you're doing any precise alignment plans, so just keep that in mind. Back to Planet. If we choose to use the Google elevation provider, here it explains the purpose of having a Google Map key. It's not only for the elevation, but for the other map services such as search, time zone, and so forth. You can tap this button to go to the web page where you can apply for the key. After you get the key, tap here, copy and paste the key, and enter it here. Same thing with the Bing elevation provider. You can go to this website to apply for the key and enter it here. I mentioned that the horizontal resolution of the Planet elevation is 90 meters. What does that mean? Well, let me demonstrate. First, I'll add a marker here. I'll enter 90 meters for the width. Let's go back to the map. We'll zoom in. Here's the circle. Its diameter is 90 meters. The elevation data is sample data. For example, let's say it sampled the elevation data at this location. The next location it will sample the data is over here, 90 meters away. So if there's any bumpy terrain over here between these 2 sampled locations, we just won't see it because there's no sampled data at these intermediate locations. So clearly, the smaller the horizontal resolution, the more accurate the elevation profile will be. If you have trouble applying the Google Map key, which is, by the way, somewhat tricky to apply, another way is to use the Google Earth Pro to get the elevation data. Mouse over an area. The bottom status bar shows the elevation. Once you get the elevation, you can refer to the camera height video tutorial to learn how to use it. Anyway, if you're interested in knowing more about the Google elevation, you can Google it and you'll find essays and web articles discussing its accuracy. Here's a table showing the accuracy level in different regions. Generally speaking, it's the most accurate in the USA and less accurate in Asia and Europe. You can also download the elevation before you go off the grid. We call that offline elevation. Now, the only offline elevation that you can download is from Planet's elevation server. Google or Bing doesn't allow us to do a batch download. To download offline elevation, tap the menu, tap the download button next to the offline elevation. Now they're being downloaded. After the download is finished, you can drag the map and notice it shows the elevation immediately without tapping. Of course, this is as long as you choose Planet as the elevation provider. You can also go to Menu, Settings, Elevation, check this downloaded offline elevation area, and go back to the map. The area that has the offline elevation will be shown in a red color. To get rid of the red colors, just tap this non-default option button, tap it, and that will reset the option. Let's set the camera pin here and set the scene pin here. We'll go to the settings and choose Google as the elevation provider. Now you see here it shows tap to update. Why doesn't it automatically update the elevation? Well, as we mentioned earlier, Google charges a fee if you use too much of their data. Each tap to update will use part of that quota. If Planet always automatically updates the elevation, it will use quite a lot of that Google elevation quota in a short time. So that's why we ask you to tap to update to save your quota. And sometimes you might wonder about the difference between the 3 elevation providers. You can find that by tapping again here. As long as you have the key for Google or Bing, the elevations will be shown for you to compare. Finally, let's open the VR viewfinder. You can see the Statue of Liberty here and the terrain behind it. You must wonder how we use the elevation data to show such a VR viewfinder. And depending on which one you choose, we only use the Google or the Bing elevation providers for important locations, such as the camera pin location, the scene pin locations, and the markers over here if they're visible in the VR. And we'll cache the elevation data so that you're only asked once. Now it needs a considerable amount of elevation data to draw in this terrain. So for the landscape here, we only use the planet elevation data. We'll download them as offline elevation and then use them. That doesn't use any Google or Bing elevation data. Now occasionally you'll find a building floating above the ground. That's because the building, which is a marker, uses the Google or Bing elevation data, and the terrain uses the planet elevation data. So say for example that Google's elevation says 100 feet and the planet elevation says only 80 feet. What you'll see then are buildings floating 20 feet above the ground. That's absolutely normal. As I said earlier, the Google elevation in general is more accurate than the planet elevation, so you can always trust the building position in the VR viewfinder and ignore the terrain. So in other words, the real situation should be for the ground to move up to touch the building, not to have the building come down to touch the ground. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching and enjoy learning and using Planet.